Her own father bet her in a poker game. And no, this is not clickbait. He thought he was throwing down one last desperate gamble, but instead he shoved his own daughter into a room full of mafia sharks and triggered a bloodbath. The craziest part? The daughter didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't break. She spotted the rigged deck in seconds, exposed the cheat in front of the most dangerous boss in Vegas, and turned herself from the prize on the table into the weapon that would destroy everyone who tried to use her. This wasn't a poker game. It was the first move in a revenge war.
The night her father used her as his final bet, the quiet in the room was so thick she could hear the whisper of cards unfelt. She was still in the gray t-shirt from her training, her hair in a loose knot threatening to unravel. The service elevator beneath Palazzo Nero had delivered her into this den, a room of men too wealthy for shouting and too lethal to need it. The atmosphere was a cocktail of old money, whiskey, and the silent, heavy scent of fear. Green lamps cast a glow over a solitary table where crystal glasses fractured the light. 2 armed guards stood against a wall, sculptures that had been taught the art of breathing. And at the table's head sat Sergio Lombardi, a name that was the very heartbeat of Las Vegas. Sergio's empire was woven into the city. Casinos, unions, nightclubs, and a stable of city councilmen who could rewrite a law over breakfast. It was said he owned 1/2 of the city, while the other half merely paid him rent for the privilege of existing. He was younger than the legend suggested, perhaps his mid-30s, with dark hair swept back and a black suit that sat on his shoulders with surgical precision. He possessed a stillness that made every other man seem boisterous in their silence. His face was a mask, only his cool, watchful eyes moved, absorbing everything. Opposite him was her father, Raymond Reyes, sweating through a white shirt he could never have afforded, likely lifted from a coat rack weeks ago. His shaking hands told her all she needed to know. Her father wielded a charm that felt like warmth until you were trapped inside its fire. Then you saw it was just hunger with perfect timing. He had taught her the hierarchy of cards long before he taught her to cross a street. By 12, she could spot a false shuffle from across a room. By 14, she could distinguish a bluff from the face of a man fighting back tears. By 16, she knew the smell of addiction, sour, metallic, and vicious. Now, at 26, she ignored most of his calls, but 40 minutes prior, an old pit boss had summoned her. "Come get him," he'd urged. "If you don't, he's not walking out there." So she had driven from the boxing gym, knuckles still taped, parked in a fire lane, and taken an elevator she was never meant to know. She had come expecting to find her father drunk, perhaps broken, maybe even bleeding. She had not come expecting to hear his voice, raw with desperation and whiskey, claim, "I still have something left." The dealer looked at him, motionless. Her father dragged a hand across his face, and then he pointed directly at her. "My daughter." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. Every head in the room turned. She froze, 3 steps from the door, as a chilling hardness settled deep within her. Her father's gaze remained on Sergio, not on her. That was the deepest cut. He lacked even the courage to face her with his shame. "Maya," he said, "she works surveillance, sharp as a tack, knows the game inside and out. You win," he offered. "She's yours until the debt is done." For a woman who had spent a lifetime mastering composure in the face of liars, for 1 single second she forgot how to draw a breath. And then a laugh escaped her, a sound that was sharp, ugly, and steeped in disbelief. "You drunk, stupid bastard," she said, advancing toward the table. "I'm not a piece of property. I am not a watch. I am not something you throw in a pot." Her father flinched, but only at the volume of her voice. It was never shame that moved him, only fear. Fear was the one authority his addiction still honored. Sergio Lombardi simply leaned back, his expression unchanged. He held her father's gaze for a long moment before his eyes shifted, landing on her. It felt like standing before a locked door, only to realize the person inside had already heard every secret of your life through the solid wood. "Human beings don't belong in a pot," Sergio said finally, his voice a low, quiet force that nevertheless made the room contract around it. Her father swallowed hard. "Then call the marker whatever you want," he mumbled. "The deed to her mother's house is in my name. The credit line, too. I signed the marker against hers. Everything tied to her is on the table." Her heart seemed to stop. She stared at him, her vision narrowing until he was the only thing she could see. "What marker?" He refused to meet her eyes, and that was all the answer she needed. She turned to Sergio. "He forged something." "I know," Sergio replied, and those two words were worse than any accusation. A chill spread across her skin. He knew. Of course, a man like that never played a hand blind. With a lift of 2 fingers, one of his men produced a slim leather folder. Sergio opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the top page before closing it. "Your father used your name for a private medical line 18 months ago," he said, his gaze fixed on her, not the man who had committed a crime. "He then leveraged a second note against the house in North Las Vegas that belonged to your mother. Both were sold. Tonight, that paper is on this table." She stared at her father. 18 months ago. She'd spent 3 weeks settling a hospital bill she thought was a clerical error. She had survived on instant noodles for 2 months to recover. She had sold her mother's bracelet just to keep the power on. And he had signed her name. Something inside her fractured, a clean final break. Her father licked his lips, attempting a smile that had disarmed so many before. "Mija, just listen." "No." The word was flat, devoid of heat. She looked back at Sergio. "If you already knew all this, why are we here?" His eyes held hers. "Because your father made a public offer," he said, "and 3 men here would buy that paper before sunrise if I decline." That made her scan the faces in the room. She recognized Enzo Carbone at the far end of the table, a man who managed gaming finance for Lombardi's casinos. She had seen him on a surveillance feed once, walking through a restricted area with a smile that never touched his cold eyes. He was handsome in that polished, predatory way, with a gold watch and fingers that caressed his chips too gently. He was watching her now, with an interest that made her skin crawl, and she knew Sergio was not lying. Sergio tapped the folder. "Your father cannot wager you, but he can lose every false claim he holds over your life. If I call and win, I own the deed, the forged debt, the marker, and the right to say where you go tonight. He will never come near you again without my permission." Her father sat up straight. "And if I win, you erase my debt to you." The tension in the room grew sharper. Even her father seemed shocked by the offer. Sergio's expression remained a mask. "I don't repeat my terms, Raymond." Her father glanced at his chips, then at her, then back at Sergio. Greed made the decision for him, it always had. "Deal." She should have screamed, should have flipped the table. Instead, she stood frozen, the blood pounding in her ears, knowing from a lifetime of experience that some moments were too hideous for tears and far too perilous for panic. The dealer began to deal the hand. She moved toward the table, an involuntary motion. It was not because she cared if her father won. He had forfeited any claim to her years ago. It was because the game felt tainted. It took her only 3 seconds to see why. The dealer's thumb lingered a fraction too long on the deck. The cut was too deep, and when the turn card was dealt, Enzo Carbone tapped his ring finger on the table once, a clear signal. Her spine went rigid. The deck was cold. This entire night had been orchestrated. Sergio placed his bet with the same calm a man might use to set down a glass. Her father matched, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The river card came. Relief and avarice washed over her father's face, the kind of look that makes men fools. He revealed his hand as if it were his salvation. 2 pair. Sergio glanced at the cards for no more than a second before laying down his own. A flush. The room held its breath. A sound escaped her father's throat, a noise too raw and animal for human language. He threw himself back from the table, his chair clattering to the floor. "No!" he hissed. "No, that's not right." "It is," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Every eye in the room turned to her. She stepped forward, pointing at the cards on the table. The deal was dirty. Enzo Carbone's lips curved into a very slow smile. Sergio's gaze shifted to her, sharper this time. Her father stared as if she were the one who had betrayed him. A man tries to sell his own daughter and is offended to find she has a breaking point. The house doesn't argue with the river, an older player muttered. She ignored him. The dealer dragged on the cut, and the burn card sat high. Somebody set that deck. Enzo spread a hand wide. "Are you accusing the room, sweetheart?" She looked him dead in the eye. "I'm accusing the one man smiling." The challenge made 2 bodyguards tense. Sergio merely lifted a single finger and they became statues again. He turned to the dealer. "Check the deck." The dealer's face went white, which was all the confirmation anyone needed. A second man stepped in, fanned the cards, and located the notches in seconds. Tiny imperfections on the corners, invisible to an untrained eye. The atmosphere in the room changed, growing not louder but far worse. It was the stillness of dangerous men calculating who would be the first to die. Her father, lost in his drunken panic, couldn't see the trap he had almost walked into, but she did. That hand was never about his victory. It was about Sergio Lombardi being caught at a rigged table with witnesses, and she had just screamed it to the entire room. Enzo Carbone's smile vanished. Then Sergio rose. She had seen powerful men her whole life. Men who believed their money could bend the laws of physics. None moved like Sergio Lombardi. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and it felt as if the temperature in the room had dropped by 20 degrees. He glanced from the marked cards to Enzo and then to my father. His eyes finally found mine. "You saw it from the doorway." The words were a statement, not a question. "Yes." "Good." It was all that was needed. He motioned to 2 men by the wall. "Take Raymond's credentials, his timepiece, his keys, and any shred of dignity he carried in here. He walks out of this room alive only because she is here to witness it." My father lunged in that moment, at me, at Sergio, at some phantom of the life his addiction screamed he was still owed. He never made it. One of Sergio's men collapsed him to the ground with a motion so fluid it barely registered as violence. I took a step back, my body moving on its own. My father choked on the rug, the scent of fury and cheap whiskey rising from him like fumes. "Maya," he cried out, "you will not leave with him." I looked down at the man on the floor. For one gut-wrenching second, I was 8 years old again, clutching a plastic spelling bee trophy on the steps of our apartment, waiting for a man who promised he'd be there. Then I was 11, watching as he sold my bicycle to fund a card game. And then I was 17, realizing my mother had passed with less pain relief than she deserved because he'd skimmed from the emergency fund on the way to the hospital. I had been burying him in pieces for my entire life. This was merely the first night his body was forced to acknowledge the grave. "I don't leave with you," I answered. Sergio's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, a complete mystery. Then he gave a single nod toward the door behind him. "You're coming with me now." I remained still. "Why?" "Because the game was a setup. Your father was the lure, and the men who arranged this are not finished with you." Across the room, the space where Enzo Carbone had been standing was now empty. That settled the one question I hadn't yet voiced. I leaned down, retrieved something from the carpet near an overturned tray of chips, and tucked it into my pocket. A single ace, its corner chipped. The proof. I stood tall and faced the most feared man in this town. "A separate room," I told him. "A separate lock. No one puts a hand on me unless I permit it. I need to see every document bearing my name tonight, and if you deceive me even once, I am gone." A faint shimmer passed over Sergio's features. It wasn't humor, but something like recognition. "Done." I walked out of that room behind him, my heart hammering against my ribs so fiercely I thought one might break. The private office overlooking the poker floor was vaster than my whole house, and held a chill the room below could not match. Glass walls surveyed the strip as if Las Vegas were a miniature city, left illuminated for men like Sergio Lombardi to contemplate when sleep eluded them. Veronica Hale, his counsel, was there with 3 binders and a tablet. She was in her 40s, sharp, impeccable, and projected the aura of a woman who could dismantle a mayor's career in a single call and not be late for her dinner reservation. She pushed the documents over the table. I took a seat and began to read. By the time I reached the 3rd page, a wave of nausea hit me. My father had attached my name to a private medical debt, and then again to a property loan secured by the small house my mother had willed to me. Both were just legal enough to hold up in court, just corrupt enough to destroy my life, and woven through a network of shell companies designed to trap me in litigation for years if I tried to fight. I gently closed the folder. "When were you planning to inform me?" The question was for everyone and no one. "No later than tomorrow morning," Veronica replied. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. How very thoughtful. Sergio was near the window, his hands in his pockets, gazing down at the city as if it had become a costly inconvenience. "Your father did not find my table by chance," he said. My head snapped up to look at him. He faced me. Someone required a game held in public. Someone needed an audience. And someone was counting on me to fly into a rage when a drunken fool placed his own daughter on the table. "Enzo?" I avoid making accusations until I can back them with hard evidence. His response was all the confirmation I needed. I took the ace from my pocket and laid it on the desk. Veronica was the first to lean forward. "Where did this come from?" "On the floor, by the chips, after the last hand." Sergio approached the desk, took the card, and angled it into the light. And there it was, a minuscule tear near the corner, almost invisible to the naked eye. His gaze rose to meet mine. "You see the board more quickly than most. It's what happens when you're raised by swindlers." Veronica carefully placed the card into an evidence bag. Sergio watched me for a moment too long before speaking. "These are your choices. First, you leave now, and by sunrise, Carbone's associates will file a claim on the house, lock your assets, and present a compelling case to several amoral men that you took marked evidence from a private game. Second, you remain under my protection for 30 days. You assist me in finding the traitors within my own organization, and once it is settled, every debt attached to your name is erased. I crossed my arms. Protection? I echoed. Isn't that what people in your circle call being a prisoner when they want to be courteous? No. The denial was so quick, so absolute, it was unnerving. I met his stare. He returned it without faltering, then defined the terms. You'll have a room that no one may enter without your consent. You'll have a phone. You will receive a salary, as this will be your work. You will have full access to the documents that involve you. You will have security, because this evening 6 men saw your father attempt to bet you, and then saw you expose a rigged game. This makes you an asset to my rivals and a problem for my allies. The sheer honesty of it was more jarring than any lie could have been. I glanced at Veronica, and if I agree, I will need copies of all of it, both digital and physical. Done, she confirmed. I turned back to Sergio, and if I refuse, he did not so much as blink. Then I will still prevent Carbone from taking you tonight, but tomorrow will become much more complicated. And there it was. Not a threat, but a simple, cold fact. I despised how much I had learned to rely on facts. I sank back in the chair, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. 30 days, I said. Not 31. 30. And I decide what I work on. You'll work on what is important. That is not what I asked. The edge of his mouth twitched, a barely perceptible motion. You will have a say, a separate room. You've already agreed to that. I'm repeating it so you understand I am serious. I understood the first time. The way he delivered the line made my heart skip once. I pushed the feeling aside. Fine, I agreed. 30 days. Then I walk away with my home, my name, and my life back. Sergio inclined his head. Valentina will take you to your room. The woman who entered moments later was tall, her face marked by scars, and she carried a stillness that could only be earned by surviving dangerous men and their terrible commands. Valentina Russo looked me over, her eyes noting the tape beneath my cuffs, the way I balanced on the balls of my feet, and she gave the slightest of nods. It wasn't a gesture of friendship, but one of appraisal. I valued that far more than a fabricated welcome. As she guided me to the elevator, I paused and looked back toward Sergio. One last thing, he waited. If I catch wind of anyone in this place saying you won me in a card game, I will personally break their nose. For the very first time, something that resembled genuine amusement flickered across his face. If you hear that rumor, you'll have to get in line. My quarters were on the highest residential floor of Palazzo Nero, a suite more expansive than the home I was raised in and more silent than any part of Las Vegas ought to be. Someone had already supplied the bathroom with unscented products, filled the closet with clothing in my measurements, and placed a knife in the dresser, precisely where a woman who never slept soundly would check first. That final detail threw me off balance. Valentina saw it. He instructed them not to disrespect you with childish sleepwear, and not to disrespect me by thinking I would need to disarm you, she explained. I looked at her. He says surprisingly considerate things for a man they speak of as if he were a force of nature. Valentina shrugged. Even storms have their own predictable patterns. Then she was gone. I let the shower run until it turned icy, and I remained under the spray long after the residue of sweat, smoke, and the poker room had vanished down the drain. I wrapped my body in a hotel robe I could never hope to own, and sat on the bed's edge, pressing my mother's silver ring deep into my palm until the hollow ache in my soul solidified into something I could bear. I did not weep. I was too consumed by rage for tears and too drained for fear. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I padded barefoot into the living area and stood before the window. The strip was a river of fire below me, a torrent of neon currency and deception. From this height, it was beautiful enough to fool the visitors into believing this city was founded on chance. It was not. Vegas was founded on hunger. Men came here certain they could outsmart the truth, and they departed with lighter wallets, heavier secrets, and wedding bands in their coat pockets that were never theirs to begin with. I knew this because my father had taught me since I was a child what desperation sounds like when it masquerades as confidence. A quiet knock sounded at the suite's door. My hand instinctively went for the knife. "It's me," Valentina's voice came through. "And before you try to stab me, Her face remained impassive. "You already had your hand on it." She turned and left before I could form a reply. I managed perhaps 2 hours of sleep. By 8 o'clock the following morning, I was inside Palazzo Nero's surveillance hub. A black coffee in my hand, I faced a wall of monitors the size of a small apartment. If a church has its saints, the city has its cameras. They watched casino floors, cashier stations, elevators, parking structures, hidden hallways, and loading bays. In Vegas, everyone told their lies out in the open and was eventually caught in brilliant, high-definition light. The room itself was cold and silent, built for people who preferred absolute control over something as unpredictable as sunlight. Analysts worked in rows under dim lighting, wearing headsets, their gazes tracing movements that an ordinary person would never notice. I felt at home there in an instant. Perhaps that was the most monstrous thing about me. Regardless of how fiercely I had struggled to create a life away from cards and cons and whispered deals, the dialect of the hidden world was still etched into my very bones. Valentina stood at my side as I replayed the footage from the night before. She allowed me nearly 20 minutes of silence before she spoke. "You have done this work before." "Monarch Queen on Fremont," I answered. "The Knightsbridge, not the glamorous venues, just drunk tourists, fake chips, and men who mistake counting cards for a personality." Her eyebrows rose just a fraction. "Why didn't you mention this to him? You never asked." A single nod from her settled a question that hung, unspoken, in the air. They replayed the footage from the private room, slowing time to a crawl. The dealer's thumb faltered. The deck's cut was wrong. Enzo's ring tapped the table just once. Her father's eyes darted right just before the last card fell, the unmistakable sign of a man who believed a promise. She replayed the moment 6 times. Valentina's voice was low. "Your father knew. He knew enough to expect salvation? Would he sacrifice you to save himself?" The question was meant to wound, but she felt nothing. "He already did." The admission snuffed out any pity before it could form, which was precisely how she needed it to be. By noon, she had 3 facts displayed on the board. The deck was cold, prepared on sight. Enzo Carboni had given the signal, a maneuver that needed access to the private room's secure chain of custody. In all of Palazzo Nero, only 6 people held that kind of clearance. Enzo, of course, was one. The other 5 were loyal to Sergio, indebted to him, or ghosts from his father's time. It was a tangled web. At 1 in the afternoon, Sergio entered the surveillance room. No one snapped to attention. That wasn't his way. But the air in the room shifted nonetheless. Men seemed more focused. The lazy clatter of keyboards ceased. An analyst straightened, as if recalling the existence of his own spine. Sergio approached her directly. No entourage, no wasted movement. "What do you have?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "Did you sleep?" Strangely, she respected him more for it. "Your game was compromised from the inside," she stated. The deck was arranged. Bora reached the table. Enzo gave the signal. My father believed that hand was his deliverance. Sergio's eyes swept the board. Supposed to. "Whoever orchestrated this wanted a show," she explained. "They wanted you to lose in spectacular fashion or for my father to die just as publicly. Perhaps both." He studied the frame-by-frame analysis without a word. Then he asked, "And why use Raymond?" "Because he's desperate, familiar, and a fool. Men like that are simple to guide. They mistake a miracle for an opportunity." At that, Sergio's focus shifted to her. "What? You speak as if you've buried people." She met his gaze without flinching. "I buried my mother." "Does that count?" Something flickered in his eyes, vanishing before she could give it a name. "Continue." So she did. They worked through the remainder of the afternoon. She constructed a map, tracing patterns of chip movements, late-night markers, and cage transactions across all of Sergio's establishments. Phantom losses materialized in various accounts, always small enough to avoid a conflict, yet large enough to be significant. Someone wasn't just fixing a few private games. They were using them as cover for a much larger theft. As the skyline bled orange over the strip, she had connected the phantom losses to a pair of loading docks and a discreet club off Sahara named the Velvet Room. Sergio stood just behind her, reading over her shoulder. His scent was faint, clean linen, leather, and the ghost of expensive smoke, the kind that never clings because he wasn't the one who partook. "You discovered this in a single day," he said. "You hired the right daughter of the wrong man." He was silent for a moment. Then, "Eat something." Her first instinct was to tell him to go to hell. Instead, she felt the deep ache of a stomach that hadn't seen food since before the boxing gym. Valentina seemed to produce a takeout container from thin air. She looked from Valentina to Sergio. "This place is unsettling." For the first time, Valentina smirked. "You'll fit right in." 3 nights later, she saved Sergio Lombardi's life, long before she'd determined if she even liked the man. From the outside, the Velvet Room was innocuous. A muted gold sign, darkened windows, and music that drifted into the alley like a whisper of perfume. Inside, it was a world of velvet booths, low-hanging chandeliers, and polished deception. The sort of place where senators found dancers, where dealers met with judges, and no one questioned the office with 2 locks and no windows. She had followed the trail of a phantom marker to that club to a chip runner named Cal Demico, a man known for handling cash transactions through the bar. She wore black slacks, a tailored jacket, and the familiar steel in her spine, the armor she wore when forced to stand near dangerous men, all while silently mapping her escape routes. Cal arrived 15 minutes late. She spotted him first, a reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bar. "That's him," she murmured. Sergio didn't move his head. "Left or right pocket?" "Inner jacket." "He's holding tension in his left shoulder as well. He's armed." Sergio moved as if nothing were amiss, drifting toward the rear corridor like a man casually inspecting his own establishment. She followed. Valentina broke off to the right. Rafe remained in place. Cal spotted them as he reached the kitchen door, and panic flared in his eyes. Dangerous men mistake panic for speed. In reality, it looks like a desperate, failing calculation. He reached inside his jacket. But she didn't see the weapon first. She saw its reflection. A figure on the mezzanine, high above the dance floor. A silver railing, a dark sleeve, and the long, unmistakable barrel of a rifle angled downward. "Down!" she yelled. She slammed her shoulder into Sergio's ribs, shoving him sideways just as the gunshot ripped through the club's noise. Glass shattered behind them. The music died. The screaming began. A second round tore into the pillar where Sergio's head had been a moment before. Rafe became a juggernaut, shielding civilians, as Valentina fired a single shot from the hall, forcing the sniper on the mezzanine to take cover. Cal fled. Sergio moved to pursue him. "Rafe's hit!" she snapped. Near the bar, Rafe was down on one knee, a dark stain of blood blooming across his jacket. Training overrode fear. She was already in motion before the thought had fully formed. She slid over shattered glass, grabbed a roll of napkins from a service station, then swore and tore off her own belt instead. The wound was high on his thigh, lethal if left alone, but survivable if she acted quickly. "Look at me," she ordered Rafe. He grimaced. "Not usually my type." "Shut up, that means you're conscious." She cinched the belt tightly above the injury. He cursed with genuine feeling. Good. Anger kept men alive longer. Sergio was beside them for a fraction of a second. "Can you move him?" "Yes," she said. "Get the bastard with the gun!" Their eyes locked for one charged instant, and then he was gone. Valentina materialized at her shoulder, weapon ready. "Ambulances are unreliable in this district. The house doctor is 4 minutes out." "Then get me towels and a bottle." Valentina barked commands and the room responded. By the time the doctor arrived, she had blood coating her wrists. Rafe remained conscious, just barely. When the chaos subsided, the sniper dead, Cal Demico vanished into the night, the club secured and the patrons silenced, she stood in a back hall, washing away the blood. From her hands in a stainless steel sink that reeked of bleach and mint, the water from the faucet ran red, then pink, and finally clear. She watched it run until the tremors began in her hands. It wasn't because of the blood. It was because she had put her hands on Sergio Lombardi and moved him on pure instinct. Because for one blinding moment, the sight of that rifle aimed down at him had felt deeply personal, and she hated what that implied. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. "You pushed me before the shot," Sergio's voice observed. The water continued to flow. "Yes." "Why?" She gripped the sides of the sink, a single sharp laugh escaping under her breath. "You're choosing this moment to ask?" This is the only moment people answer honestly. She cut the water and turned to face him. He had removed his jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the throat, with a dark smear of someone else's blood on one cuff. This close, he seemed less of the untouchable figure from the poker room. Harder in a way, more human in all the ways that powerful men despise being seen. "You want the honest answer?" she asked. "Because if you had died tonight, half of this city would turn feral by sunrise. Your rivals would tear apart everything you've built, and I would be caught in the wreckage." He studied her for a long moment. "That's not the complete answer." "No." "What's the rest?" She should have lied. Instead, she said, "I recognize the look of a room when a bullet is about to claim the one person everyone else pretends is insignificant." His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. It was enough. My father used to bring me to his games when I was 13, she said, her voice quiet. Not to play, to watch, to tell him who was bluffing, who was cheating, who still had money hidden in a second pocket. The men there ignored her, just a skinny girl with braid marks in her hair and shoes from a thrift store. Then one evening, a man who lost pulled a gun. He aimed it not at my father, but at the man running the game. Everyone froze. Everyone waited to see what power looks like the moment it begins to bleed. I learned something that night. People call men untouchable only until someone finally touches them. The silence that stretched between them changed. He moved closer, not to crowd her, but just enough to alter the very air between them. And yet, you moved anyway. Don't make me regret it. A line formed at the edge of his mouth. It wasn't a smile, but something far more private. Too late, he said. Then he reached past her, took a clean towel from the rack and offered it. She stared at the towel. He stared back at her. It took her a moment to understand it was for her hands, where traces of blood still stained her wrists. She took the towel. Their fingers brushed for a single, fleeting instant. Her pulse stuttered so violently it nearly sparked anger. A full week went by before either of them spoke of the kiss that never happened. By then, she knew more about Sergio Lombardi's empire than she had ever wished to. She understood he survived on 4 hours of sleep, at best. She saw how his quiet authority in meetings compelled others to stumble over their words to fill the void he left. His people were more terrified of failing him than of his rage, which spoke volumes about his preferred methods. Accuracy, repercussions, never a scene without a reason. She knew he lived by a code. The women in his establishments were not to be touched by his employees. Thieves who took from vacationers were fired, not maimed. Unless violence was involved, any man who struck a woman in his casinos was removed via a service exit, blacklisted from places they never knew he owned until their faces were flagged by another security team. Women who couldn't walk were given a ride home, without inquiry, without their keys being duplicated. This wasn't the mark of a hero, it was the mark of a predator with principles. In a city like Vegas, that meant more than it should. The further their investigation went, the fouler the discoveries. Phantom IOS, crooked games, vanished funds, illicit deliveries masked as alcohol shipments. Enzo Carbone sat at the center of this web, like a venomous creature in expensive suits. All trails pointed his way, but none could ever get close enough to land a fatal blow in the open. Then she saw the deviation. Surveillance was almost empty, nearing the midnight hour. The analysts had mostly departed, leaving the hum of machines and the scent of old coffee. Sergio was opposite her, reviewing a file, while she played the same moment from the first hand for the 20th time. Her gaze locked onto her father's hand, not his cards, but the hand itself. His tell for a sober lie was a thumb brushing his jaw. But intoxicated, the signal shifted. A single deliberate press of his ring finger to the table's edge. Her eyes darted across the image. Enzo's hand, the same tap. Once. She sat bolt upright, a chilling clarity dawning. She gestured at the screen. A signal! Sergio moved to her side. Her father wasn't tipped off by a whisper. He knew the deck was rigged because he was being directed. 1 tap meant hold. 2 would have meant to fold. They were stringing him along, one false hope at a time. Sergio leaned over her, his presence a tangible warmth beside her. Enzo was using the exact same signal. She loaded a recording from 2 days prior, a baccarat table at another casino. A dealer moved. Enzo walked past. The ring finger tap. A player held his bet against staggering odds and miraculously won. Clip after clip revealed the same pattern. Sergio observed quietly before speaking. He's communicating with players on my floor using signs. Not just players, she realized. You're dealers, too. She sank back, the whole grotesque picture materializing. This is more than skimming. He's creating leverage, collecting favors, and owning souls who believe they just had a lucky night. As you noticed because your father taught you the silent language. The truth of it was a bitter pill. Yes. He studied her for a long beat. A useful man, your father, he finally remarked, his tone detached and cool. The chair wheel shrieked as she spun to face him. Careful. His expression shifted instantly, not to regret, but to focus. He knew his words had struck a nerve. My father is a coward with a charming smile and a sickness for the tables. He loved the gamble more than my mother, more than life itself. The only worthwhile lesson he ever gave me was how to spot a liar before a single word is spoken. The room fell still. Sergio stood taller. You're right, he conceded. His agreement was unexpected. He could have easily argued. Most men of his stature would, especially when questioned before their staff. But he did not. His deference somehow stung more. She rose, the room suddenly suffocating. I need some air. She wasn't challenged. Taking the private staircase to the rooftop deck above the control room, she stepped into the vast desert night. A dry wind met her, along with a panorama of Vegas that resembled a costly hallucinatory vision. The strip pulsed with light far below. The fountains at the Bellagio danced in a sequence meant to make people forget their losses. Aircraft traced languid arcs across the sky, and somewhere past the glitter and stone, the desert lay in silent, utter apathy. Her hands clenched the stone balustrade as she fought to relax her jaw. A moment passed before the door opened once more. It was inevitable. Sergio emerged onto the terrace, shutting it quietly. He maintained a careful distance between them, a gesture she noted. I rarely apologize, he stated. She gazed at the sprawling city lights. That sounds more like a warning than an apology. After a pause, he said, I misspoke. The directness of it was almost comical. Instead of laughing, she countered, Do you believe I owe him a gentle memory just because his failings became my assets? No. His reply was quiet but firm. I believe that agony and utility can exist in the same space. That doesn't make them one and the same. His words silenced her. Because they were true, and she despised that they were. The breeze caught stray strands of her hair. She tucked them back as she began to speak. My mother worked double shifts cleaning rooms in an old hotel off Flamingo. She would return smelling of chemicals and cheap soap, but would still cook me eggs at midnight if I couldn't sleep. When she fell ill, she concealed it because we were poor. When things got worse, there was supposed to be emergency money in our home. At least she believed there was. He took a portion, just enough to gamble away and deny it. She passed away 6 months after for other real reasons, but the memory of counting the missing bills in that envelope remains. She had never shared the full story with a single soul. Not her trainer, who knew her anger fueled her punches, not her colleagues, who assumed she loathed gamblers as a rule, and certainly not the man who owned half of Vegas and now her fate. Sergio heard her out in complete silence. After she finished, he spoke. My mother dealt blackjack on the late shift, long before I could grasp why losing makes men cruel. He continued, My father drank away half of her earnings, bet the remainder, and once pawned her wedding ring for a debt he swore he could reclaim on the next deal. She turned, studying him. His expression was a mask, but his tone was bare. It held the quality of old iron, forged in fire and carried just beneath the surface for a lifetime. "When I heard your father speak your name at the table," he said, his voice low, "I almost drove him through it." A tightness seized her chest. "Why stop?" she asked. "Because ending him in that moment would have benefited the one who set him up." The logic was as cruel as it was sound. His gaze drifted back to the city. "So I took the hand," he explained, "and made certain everyone saw me take the contract, not you." She furrowed her brow. "For what reason?" This time his eyes met hers. "Because this town can whisper what it wants about a woman seen with me," he stated, "but predators don't target what they believe is already mine." The sentiment should have enraged her. Instead, it did something far more perilous. She believed him. She believed he had wielded his own fearsome name as a shield, preventing viler men from claiming her. The quiet between them stretched on. She became hyper-aware of the wind, the city below, and the man who stood near enough to be reached, yet far enough to respect her space. "You truly don't take what isn't offered," she observed softly. His eyes flickered to her lips for a moment before returning to meet hers. "No." Her heart leaped. Prudence demanded she walk away. Prudence screamed to recall her anger, her fatigue, and that she was on a roof with a man who could make powerful people tremble. Instead, she closed the distance. Not close enough to make contact, but enough to shift the atmosphere. "If I kiss you now," she murmured, "it can't be mistaken for poor judgment born from gratitude." A faint, dark smile touched his lips. "Then you had better be certain of your reasons." She was. Therein lay the danger. She initiated the kiss. She anticipated hesitation, opposition, perhaps even surprise. What she received was a level of self-mastery that nearly broke her. There was no grasping, no claiming, no exploitation of her move. He raised a hand, slowly giving her time to retreat, and cupped her neck as if she were both fragile and deadly. His kiss was warm, measured, and ruinously patient. Nothing was hurried, nothing was taken. The world below simply vanished. He only deepened the kiss after she leaned into him. She slipped a hand beneath his collar, needing to know if a man like Sergio Lombardi had a human heartbeat or merely a convincing facsimile. It was there, and it was racing. The discovery excited her more than was wise. He was the one to pull away, his forehead nearly resting on hers, his breathing ragged for the first time she could recall. Maya. Just her name, but it felt like a boundary he was struggling to maintain. She swallowed hard. "What is it?" "If this becomes more," he said, "it will not be founded on the idea that a room full of men saw you won as a prize." His words took a moment to sink in. Then the realization struck her. The card room, her father, that public bet, the inevitable rumors. He was assuring her that anything between them would not be built upon that shame. A part of her fractured so suddenly it was painful. "Good," she whispered back, "because anyone who believes I am easily won has never met me." That coaxed a genuine smile from him, small, scarce, and dangerously captivating. "No," he agreed. "I doubt the word easy has ever applied to you." The world seemed to tilt beneath her. She stepped away, not for distance, but for air. 3 days later, Enzo Carbone made his move. Security discovered a crate of marked decks hidden inside her suite's closet. 2 envelopes of skimmed cash lay concealed behind a dresser panel she had never seen. One of the chip adjustments from a lost transfer was authenticated by a ghost login, traced to a terminal linked to her own credentials. It was a perfect frame, insultingly so. The subsequent meeting convened in one of Sergio's upper conference rooms with 12 men seated at the table in an atmosphere so tense it felt solid. Valentina was a shadow at her back. Sergio presided at the head. 3 chairs to his right sat Enzo, his features molded into a mask of flawless concern. She wanted to shoot him just for existing. Instead, she stood perfectly still as one of Sergio's old captains displayed the evidence bag containing the marked decks and declared, "Seems straightforward enough to me." "Of course it does," she snapped, her voice like cracking ice. The captain's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone and your intelligence. No one foolish enough to hide evidence in their own room possesses the cunning to execute a scheme you're all too blind to recognize." Enzo sighed, as if she were a profound disappointment. "This is regrettable." She turned on him so sharply that Valentina took half a step back. "You know what's regrettable. Your face." A few of the men bristled with offense. Sergio's expression remained unchanged, but she saw the barest flicker in his eyes. It was the only thing that kept her from doing something she couldn't take back. A captain shoved his chair from the table. "She has no place in this building." Enzo held up his hands. "No one wishes for this to be true, but feelings are not facts." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. She looked to Sergio, and for one agonizing second he offered only silence. After everything in the rooftop, after all the blood and the promises, he said nothing. The impact was more stunning than she anticipated. Then he rose. The room deferred to his movement as if to gravity itself. "Maya remains under guard," he announced. "Access restricted. No communication, no outside contact until I determine if I'm facing betrayal or bait." The ground fell away beneath her. She stared at him, but he refused to meet her gaze. That absence of his eyes inflicted a wound deeper than any anger ever could. Valentina's touch on her elbow was a feather-light warning, not a command. Play this smart, or perhaps that was just a voice in her own head. She let Valentina lead her from the room, because pride without a plan is how women end up dead. The guest wing they confined her to was so lavish it felt like an insult, locked from the outside, with 2 guards posted in the hall, no electronics, and no windows that could be opened. She stood frozen in the center of the room, fighting the overwhelming urge to shatter every fragile thing. Betrayal arrived first as a searing heat, then a numbing cold, and finally a hollow sense of stupidity. By midnight, she had worn a groove into the plush carpet. At 1 in the morning, the door opened. Sergio stepped in by himself. The guards closed it behind him. She didn't move. He stood just inside, sleeves rolled up, his jaw set, looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. "Say what you came here to say," she told him, "and then get out." He walked across the room with no sense of urgency and offered her the knife. She looked from the blade to his face. "The room was wired," he stated softly. "Half of that table is still under surveillance. Enzo had to witness my doubt. So did the men who are still undecided." She made no move to take the knife. "Is that your excuse? To publicly cast you under suspicion and then privately hand back your weapon, as if I should applaud the tactic?" His voice remained flat. "No. My explanation is that had I defended you in there without evidence, Enzo would have been gone by dawn, along with whatever he is trying to move." Clears throat. "This way, he assumes he has driven a wedge between us." The anger inside her did not disappear, but it shifted its form. "Complicated. That might have been useful information before I was left standing there like a fool." It was unthinkable. She crossed her arms tighter. You don't get to hurt me for some greater purpose and call it a clean move just because you had a reason. At that, something finally fractured his composure. Not anger, but a raw, sharp frustration. You think I'm not aware of that? The room fell silent. His hand tightened on the knife before he placed it on the table, separating them. I am trying to keep you alive, whole, and with your name intact, while a man in my own organization compromises my floors and eliminates my people one by one. There are no clean moves left. That silenced her because it was true, and because she was weary enough to despise the truth on principle. He dragged a hand over his neck, his gaze holding hers in a way that felt more dangerous than rage. Enzo acted quickly after the setup. He said, He removed your father from the rehabilitation center where I had placed him. She stared. You had him where? He would have been dead within 48 hours on the street. Don't confuse mercy with sentiment. Do you have his location? Not yet. A tightness seized her chest, not because she longed for her father's return, but because men with addictions often become convenient bodies. Sergio took a folded note from his pocket and passed it to her. A single line. Bring the ace, come alone, midnight tomorrow, Old Star Motel. Her fingers crushed the paper. He knows I have it. He either guessed or someone talked. She looked up. You want me to sit here while you prepare an ambush? I want you to avoid walking into one. She should have agreed. Instead, she said, That is my father. And this is Enzo Carbone. They stared at one another across a space that was suddenly too vast and too crowded. Then, more quietly, he said, Don't go without me. The way he said it nearly broke her, not as an order, but as a plea he loathed making. She was the first to look away. That ought to have been her answer. It wasn't. The Old Star Motel was perched at the city's edge where Las Vegas feigned its end. A cemetery of neon with fractured signs and sand eating away at the asphalt. A relic from a time when men came west with 6-shooters and better lies. She went alone anyway. Of course she did. Because grief drives women to commit foolish acts that can resemble courage from a distance. Because no matter your age, some part of you always runs toward the fire when your father is at its heart. Because Enzo was right about one thing. She craved answers more than she valued instructions. She parked 2 blocks away, moved through a rear service alley, and slipped inside through a door barely clinging to its frame. The ace was taped beneath her ribs in a compression bandage. A knife was strapped to her thigh, and a cheap burner phone sat silent in her pocket. She had left her own phone behind. If Sergio was tracking her, he would need the device Valentina once threatened to stitch into her jacket hem, a threat she had laughed at. It turned out Valentina had not been joking. Room 11 had a functioning light. Her father was bound to a chair in the middle of the room. He appeared 10 years older than he had just a week prior, with blood dried beneath one nostril, a swollen eye, and wrists chafed raw. When his eyes met hers, something that looked like shame finally surfaced on his face. Maya. She froze just inside the door. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, stale smoke, and regret. No, she said. You don't get to use my name like that. He swallowed with difficulty. I had no idea he would take it this far. Which man? His laugh broke in half. That's the issue, isn't it? There are so many of them to choose from. She remained where she stood, waiting. He shut his eyes for a moment, then reopened them with a dazed kind of clarity some men only find when they have exhausted all their lies. Enzo approached me 2 months ago, said he could erase the medical debt and some of the mortgage if I would just sit in a few games and play the fool when told. He said all I had to do was bring you in if the situation soured. A deep cold washed over her. He had wanted her there. You noticed too much, her father whispered. You always did. He recalled you from when you were just a kid in the side rooms. He said if you spotted a pattern, he would know precisely how to play his hand. A silent rage climbed through her so fast she had to breathe around it. So you sold my eyes. His head bowed. I was certain Lombardi would never accept the wager. And there it was, the rotten core of it all. Not that he had offered her up, but that he had misread the table. You were wrong. He looked up at her, and for one terrible moment she saw the man she used to wait for on the front steps. The one who sometimes bought her an orange soda on his small wins and called her his lucky star as if it held some meaning. I know, he said. Mija, I know. She moved closer then, not from a place of forgiveness, but because she needed him to hear every single word. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the debt. It's not the counterfeit documents. It isn't even hearing that you put me on the table. It's that some piece of me still came for you, and I despise myself for it. His face crumbled. Good. He had earned at least that much pain. A slow clap echoed from the doorway behind her. Enzo Carbone, Clear's throat, was leaning against the frame in a dark coat, smiling like a man who was pleased with the floral arrangements at his own funeral. 4 men fanned out behind him. She moved sideways instantly, keeping the chair and her father between them. Enzo's eyes fell to her torso. You brought it. Perhaps. He gave a soft laugh. Still the clever one, still the viper in a fine suit. His smile grew sharper. You understand? This is why I wanted you at my tables. Most people never see the shape of the con. You always did. She kept her breathing even. He took a single slow step into the room. Give me the ace and I'll let him go. Her father made a choked sound. Don't. Enzo paid him no mind. It is only a Clear's throat card, Maya. It is never just a card. Something in his expression acknowledged her point, almost with approval. Then he sighed. A shame. The men behind him advanced. So did she. She slammed the room's light switch. Darkness consumed them. A gun fired. Her father yelled. She was already dropping low. She kicked the chair sideways into the first shape she sensed moving through the room, then drove her shoulder into the second man's knee with enough force to hear it pop. He screamed. She came up, the knife already in her hand, and sliced it across an arm that was reaching for her. A fist hammered the wall, followed by a muffled curse. A single searing bloom of light from a gun's muzzle, and then the motel windows imploded. Not from bullets, but from flash charges, a concussive wave of white light and sound. In the hall, men were yelling, Valentina. The relief was so sudden it nearly stole the strength from my legs. But then another shot cracked the air, perilously close. My father jolted in his chair. For one impossible, suspended second, the room froze. He glanced down, where a crimson stain was spreading across his shirt. No. The word escaped my own lips, an utterance I hadn't chosen to make. Enzo swore, lunging for the bathroom window as Sergio's men streamed through the door like finely tailored judgment. Sergio himself was the last to breach the room. His eyes found me, then my father, then the blood. "Carbone!" Valentina yelled from the alley, just as gunfire tore through the night outside. I fell to my knees by the chair. My father's breaths were wet. Broken things. The bullet had torn through his upper chest. It was bad, terribly bad. Instinct took over, my hands searching for the wound. Pressure, angle, stay with me, stay. He seized my wrist. Blood stained his teeth as he attempted a smile. My vision blurred, faster than the chaos around us. "Don't, Maya." His grip was faint, yet impossible to ignore. "Listen, I said don't." A cough tore through him, as if pain itself were carving the truth from his body. "I loved the table more than anything," he rasped. "That's the foulest truth I own. More than money, more than your mother, more than that little girl who waited for me on the stoop." All I could think was that one right move could fix what was broken. Tears were on my face before I even felt them fall. "You don't get to tell me this now." I know. His admission was a deeper wound than the bullet. "But you're different. You never played my game. You read the odds and you survive. Bet on yourself for once, mija. Not on men like me." His fingers went limp. I snatched them back. My father's gaze drifted past me to the doorway where Sergio stood for a fleeting moment before moving on. Enzo was still out there, and men like them are never afforded just one crisis at a time. Then my father's eyes found mine, truly found them, perhaps for the first time in an age. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and with that he was gone. I have no memory of screaming. Valentina told me later that I didn't. I just fell silent for a long while. Enzo vanished that night, slipping into the maze of service roads behind the motel. 2 of his men weren't so fortunate. One bled out in the parking lot. The other began talking before sunrise, confirming everything I already suspected. Enzo wasn't just skimming. He was building a shadow empire, collecting compromised dealers, officials, and captains, one debt at a time. When he finally moved on, Sergio, half the power would be his, and the other half too terrified to object. My father had been a single thread caught in a much larger web. I passed the next day alone in my mother's house in North Las Vegas. It was a single-story stucco box with a sun-fractured driveway. The porch light was still tilted, a monument to the next weekend we'd always planned for, a weekend that would never come. I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cold cabinets, and cried until my ribs ached, not just for my father, or even mostly for him. I cried for my mother, for the lost years, for the woman I'd become, who confused survival with strength because she didn't know what else to call the invisible bruises men left behind. Sergio never came inside. He stood guard in the driveway for nearly 2 hours, understanding something most men never will. He understood that sometimes safety is distance. When I finally stepped outside, he was there, leaning against a black sedan in his shirt sleeves. The desert sun cut sharp angles across his face. We stood in silence. I walked down the steps, stopped before him, and asked, "Did you know I would come out?" "Yes." "Does that certainty ever get exhausting?" "Sometimes." I should have offered a smile. Instead, I said, "He told the truth before he died. I hate that it took a bullet." Sergio watched me for a long beat. "Truth is a luxury in this city, he said. The words lacked cynicism. They were simply tired. A single hoarse laugh escaped my raw throat. "You certainly have a way of comforting a woman." "I have a way of not lying to one." That was all it took. I stepped into him, pressing my forehead to his chest. The moment I did, his arms came around me. They weren't tight or possessive. They were just there. A solid, warm, unwavering anchor. I fell apart right there in his arms, in the middle of my mother's cracked driveway, as the distant hiss of Vegas traffic faded and the sun burned on, oblivious. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He offered no judgment on my father's flaws. He just held me until I could draw a breath without trembling. When I finally pulled away, he brushed a tear from under my eye with his knuckle. "Come back with me," he said. I met his gaze. "To the tower or to the war?" "Yes." The answer was so perfectly Sergio that I laughed. And in that sound, a crack formed in my grief, allowing something else to breathe. I realized I wasn't afraid to go back. Not to his fortress, not to him. "I'm done running from games other men designed," I said. His eyes sharpened. "Good," he replied, "because we finish this in 3 days." He explained the strategy that night in a private lounge high above the casino floor as the city below gambled on, ignorant that its most dangerous men were preparing for a final bloody hand. Enzo had set his stage, a high-stakes charity invitational at the Crescent Ballroom. It was one of Sergio's own properties, with a guest list of commissioners, investors, and old Vegas blood. Public enough for legitimacy, private enough for a coup. It was meant to be a show of unity, but it was truly Enzo's opening gambit. He planned to leak evidence, spark panic, and turn captains against Sergio using his compromised channels. He would also eliminate Sergio if he could. "He'll rig the game," I said. "Yes, and you will be there anyway." "Yes." I looked at him, our reflection staring back from the night-darkened windows. "No," I corrected. "I am playing." He went still. Near the bar, Valentina wore an expression of careful disapproval. Sergio's voice was low. "No." I crossed my arms. The last time I was at a table like that, I was the prize. This time, I am choosing my own seat. His jaw set. "Maya, you need someone who knows the tells, the deck's language, the burn patterns. You need someone who knows how Enzo cheats when he believes he's the smartest man alive. That is me, not your captains, not some hired gun. Me." "I am not questioning your skill. I am questioning the risk." "I know," I said. "That's precisely why I'm right." From the bar, Valentina muttered something in Italian that was both insubordinate and deeply approving. Sergio glanced at her. She offered nothing. He turned back to me. "If you tell me no, I'll do it without your permission anyway." His eyes narrowed. "That threat carries more weight when you haven't already proven you mean it." I tilted my head. "Exactly." The room fell into that tense quiet that often precedes violence. Then Sergio exhaled sharply through his nose, his tell for a lost argument he grudgingly respected. "You get 1 seat," he said. "Valentina has the room. 2 of my shooters are in the rafters, outside of Event Security's chain of command. You'll wear a hidden microphone. If something feels wrong, you speak the word and we end it." "What's the word?" He considered it for a moment. "Home." I stared, and he didn't grasp the impact of his choice until he saw my expression shift. The hardness in his face softened just slightly, but it was there. "You hate it," he stated. "No," I answered with brutal honesty. "That's the problem." He moved around the table, stopping just close enough to make my pulse jump, but far enough to let me think. "Then don't give me a reason to regret this." I lifted my chin. "You act as if you don't already know I'm the best bad decision you've made in years." A rare, dark smile touched his lips. "That," he said, "I know." We prepared for 2 days. Not cards, I needed no help there. We prepared for everything else. Valentina drilled me on security patterns, exit strategies, and emergency protocols. Rafe, limping with a stubbornness that defied his recent leg wound, taught me how to glide through a crowd like a ghost. Sergio remained a silent observer through it all, but his gaze was constant. He was always watching. On the second night, long after the ballroom had been secured, I found him standing alone in the empty high-limit room where my nightmare began. The poker table sat under a soft green lamp, a pristine deck at its center, chairs arranged with stark precision. He stood on the exact spot he'd occupied the night my father bet my life away. I entered, closing the door behind me. "Are you planning to burn the table as a symbolic gesture?" I asked. "Or is that for tomorrow?" He glanced over his shoulder. I was considering new felt. I almost smiled. Her gaze drifted to the empty space where her father's chair once stood. A phantom pain, fast and sharp, coursed through her, and Sergio noticed. He said nothing, simply easing into the seat nearest him. Not at the table's head, but to its side. A gesture of offering, not of dominance. She claimed the chair across from him. Silence held them for a beat before he pushed an object over the wood. It was the folded agreement from their first meeting. Her name, her father's counterfeit notes, his mark, and Sergio's. She met his eyes. "When this is over," he murmured, "it turns to ash." "Why now?" "Because if tomorrow fails, you won't believe a document in my vault mattered more than your free will." A profound hush filled the space. Her fingers grazed the contract's edge, but she left it untouched. "Why must you do that?" "Do what?" "Speak in a way that makes me forget half the city fears you." He shifted back, his gaze steady on hers. "The half that listens is the half I value." A single short laugh escaped her before the gravity returned. "If I fall tomorrow, you will not." Sergio. The name and the way she uttered it caused a subtle shift in his features. Her own voice remained a level line. "If that happens, you need to know this while the words are still mine to speak. What grew between us wasn't because you needed an asset. It was because you never treated me like a prize to be won." He remained perfectly still, not a single flicker of an eyelid. So she continued, because truth was a currency she could suddenly afford. "I cannot guess what we are after Enzo. Perhaps nothing, or perhaps the one moment of peace in our worlds. But I know it is real. That is all I know." For a long moment, all the city's armor seemed to fall away from Sergio Lombardi. He then rose, walked round the table, and paused by her chair, extending his hand. A simple offer. She accepted and rose with him. He raised her hand, turning it over, and pressed his lips to the soft skin of her wrist, where her life's rhythm was strongest. As he looked up, the frost in his gaze had thawed. "If tomorrow ends badly," he said softly, "I will set this city ablaze before they take you." Her breath hitched. "That is profoundly unhealthy." "Yes." A helpless, genuine smile touched her lips. "As are you." The Crescent Ballroom was a gilded cage shimmering with light. It was a world of crystal fixtures, pale orchids, and velvet partitions, where dealers moved like shadows, and politicians feigned ignorance of the bookies beside them. Investors forced laughter at poor jokes because influence makes everyone polite. It was all gleaming, costly, and hollow, a perfect mirror of Vegas. She was dressed in black, not in a gown meant for admiration, but a suit tailored for action. Her hair was pulled back, severe and clean, her mother's ring a cold weight on her hand. Valentina had suggested an earpiece. She had declined. The microphone on her wrist would suffice. Her hidden ace was nestled in an inner seam of her jacket. Sergio made his entrance 10 minutes after her, yet his presence altered the very atmosphere. His black tuxedo was worn like an instrument of war. Men's heads turned, women feigned indifference. The flash of cameras went unanswered. His gaze found hers across the crowded floor. Just for a moment. It was all that was needed. Enzo Carbone performed the role of charming host to perfection. It was always true of his kind. Wickedness in search of praise always puts on its best attire. He glided between tables, shaking hands, charming officials, and lavishing praise on patrons, dripping venom into words without a single drop spilling. The last game commenced at 9:30. She claimed the open seat at Sergio's right as the audience fell into a focused hush. When the announcer spoke her name, it sounded like an oddity. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. A few knew her from whispers. The girl from that card game, the one Lombardi had supposedly claimed. She let the rumors fly. When this night was over, she intended for them to be silenced by the truth. Enzo was seated opposite her. A daring move, he purred as the cards were shuffled. Liars often say that when their hands tremble. His smile was thin, morning yet still defiant, remarkable. She arranged her chips, breathing yet still more adept at seeing through you than you are at concealing yourself. The opening hands unfolded just as she had foreseen. Enzo was methodical. The dealer was overly polished, his actions too flawless, a caricature of fairness for the watching eyes. That alone was a signal. True professionals don't act innocent, they simply do their job. She sacrificed 2 minor pots, one another, and let a strong hand go just to observe the ripples. From 2 tables away, a gaming official kept watch. A pair of Sergio's lieutenants lingered by the far wall, feigning a conversation about donations. Valentina drifted through the assembly, a phantom clad in steel and stilettos. On hand 7 she found it, not in the dealer's hands, but in the tray of discards. The wear on the edges of the burnt cards was inconsistent with the deck in play. A difference in storage, a variation in the sealant's age. They were prepared to introduce a cold deck when the stakes were highest. Her face revealed nothing. Sergio had yet to enter a single hand. He was biding his time, as was she. Enzo claimed 2 sizable pots, and his posture eased just slightly. It was the error she anticipated. Men so often confuse restraint with weakness. On hand 10, she was dealt pocket queens. A change flickered in Enzo's eyes at the size of her wager. The dealer's left thumb lingered for a fraction of a second too long on the deck's edge. That was the sign, the tell. The turn card was legitimate. The river card would be the lie. She sensed it a heartbeat before it came. Hold! Her voice sliced the air so abrupt that half the room flinched. The dealer's motion ceased, the final card held fast in his grip. Every head turned. Sergio remained immobile. A faint smile touched Enzo's lips. Is there a problem? Something. Yes, she affirmed, rising with deliberate grace. Her gaze swept past him, first to the commissioner, then to the silent crowd, and finally it settled on the dealer. That card is not from the deck we've been using. A brittle quiet shattered through the ballroom. The dealer's throat worked. That's ridiculous. Is it? She extended a hand for the discards. In a flash, Valentina was beside her, not to interfere, but to eliminate any sudden threats. She lifted the top burn card, angling it into the chandelier's glow. To the casual eye, the edge appears black. Her voice was clear, compelling the room to listen. It isn't. It is blue-black, a subtle discrepancy in the finish. Same as the ace from the game 4 weeks ago where my father was set up at a marked table. The murmurs intensified. Enzo's smirk evaporated. She reached inside her jacket and produced the preserved ace. A wave of sharp breaths swept the room. Her eyes met Sergio's, and his were brilliant and fierce. There was no shock in his expression, only a pride so potent it nearly fractured her composure. She placed the ace next to the burn card. The notching is identical, she stated. Same edge treatment, same cold stock. Enzo Carbone has been using rigged decks across multiple properties to buy debts and leverage people under the cover of ghost losses. A commissioner stood. One of the investors did too. Enzo threw his chair back. This is a performance. No, she replied. This is math finally weary of your face. The dealer fled. Valentina neutralized him in under 3 paces. And then the room went dark. Of course it did. Darkness and screams arrived as one. She dropped to the floor on pure reflex. A shot rang out, then another, and through the pandemonium, Sergio's voice, a low roar of command. Seal the room! Crimson emergency lights pulsed to life. Bodies scrambled. Guards yelled. A waiter went down amid shattered glass. There was weeping, and there were prayers. Enzo had vanished. She didn't hesitate. She was already moving. Service corridor, left turn, maintenance stairs. She knew the way, having drilled it 2 days earlier while Valentina honed her timing to the second. Her wrist communicator sputtered. Maya! It was Sergio. Where? North service stairs, she gasped. Stop! No! The line hissed with his frustration. Then, roof access. He'll try the sign catwalk. It was the same conclusion she had reached. She took the stairs at a punishing pace, bursting through the rooftop door into a gale of hot Vegas wind, the scent of metal, and the buzz of ancient lights. The electric city sprawled beneath them. In the distance, Enzo, nursing an injured arm, stumbled with a gun toward the towering palazzo sign that climbed up the building's side. A narrow catwalk. No real cover. Bad footing. Sergio emerged from the doorway just behind her. A gunshot echoed. He faltered. In that instant, her world stopped. He fell to one knee by the wall, a hand pressed to his shoulder. Enzo's laugh was a ragged, cruel sound. There you are. Everything seemed to slow. The injury was not fatal. Shoulder, bloody, but he would live if they survived. Enzo retreated onto the catwalk, his weapon aimed at Sergio, his gaze fixed on her. Funny city, he yelled against the wind. Men build everything in it on luck, then act offended when the house cheats. House? She moved to the side, pulling his focus. You were never the house. You were only vermin in the wiring. His lips curled into a sneer. She glanced at Sergio. He was on his feet, unsteady, blood staining his shirt, his eyes hard enough to turn the night to ice. Her gaze returned to Enzo. No, she stated. I am ending what you began. He pivoted the gun in her direction. It was the moment she had engineered. In that instant, his attention on Sergio wavered for half a heartbeat. In that instant, the catwalk sagged beneath his weight where rust had eaten at the metal. Because men like Enzo always watch faces first when they are winning. It was another lesson her father had given her. She made her move, not at the weapon. Toward the control box mounted beside the sign support. With the maintenance bar at her feet, she slammed the emergency cutoff. The palazzo's brilliant sign went black. Darkness swallowed the world. Enzo fired into the void, the shot sparking against metal. She struck him, low and hard, her shoulder driving into his hips with a force drilled into her by a coach who used language no lady should hear. She used it all. The gun skittered away across the catwalk. Enzo's fist tangled in her jacket as they slammed into the rail. For one terrible moment, there was only wind, steel, and the chasm of city lights yawning beneath them. His elbow shattered against her ribs. Pain flared white behind her eyes. She swung the bar up under his jaw, fueled by every last bit of rage she'd held since her father spoke her name like it was just collateral. His hold slackened. She ripped herself free. As he lunged for the weapon, Sergio fired. The shot echoed through the wind and dark. Enzo froze, glancing down at the stain spreading across his chest, as if shocked the odds had finally betrayed him. He swayed once, then twice, before vanishing for the low railing into the abyss. The silence that fell at the roof was so absolute it rang. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the catwalk, trembling, staring at the space where Enzo had been. Sergio was at her side instantly, his own arm bleeding. His hand cupped the back of her neck, a steady, warm, and real anchor. "Look at me." She did. The city lights blurred into tears. "Are you with me?" "Yes." "Good." Then the adrenaline fled her body in a savage wave and she fell against him before she even knew she was moving. He guided her off the catwalk, across the roof, and into the service hall. Valentina found them there with a medical team and a single arched eyebrow that conveyed everything. "I told you so, and thank God. And if you die now, I will be profoundly irritated." Sergio wouldn't accept aid until she was treated. She refused care until he was. Valentina threatened to sedate them both. Rafe, wan but alive, limping faster than his doctor would have wanted, declared them both insufferable. The hospital was discreet, so expensive that the walls themselves seemed bound by non-disclosure agreements. Sergio's shoulder was sutured. Her ribs were bruised, one almost fractured, and her hands looked as if they had fought a truck. They were both alive. It felt improbable. By dawn, the story had already seeped into every corner of Las Vegas that counted. Enzo was dead, the crooked games were exposed, and a commissioner's inquiry was open. 3 councilmen were suddenly unreachable. 2 captains swore new allegiance to Lombardy before the sun rose. Half the city claimed they knew it would end this way. The other half pretended they hadn't been taking Carbone's money. Vegas never says sorry, it just rearranges the board. A week passed, and the last documents from her father's deceit were nullified. The house was hers, the medical threats vanished, bank accounts were freed. 2 creditors were quietly convinced to forget her number. Veronica presented the final documents with a professional air, along with a bottle of very fine champagne. Maya didn't drink. She'd learned young what happened when families built their joy around bottles. She was standing in the deserted private poker room on the 8th night after the fall when Sergio found her. The same green lamps hung over the same polished table. But the atmosphere had changed. The ghosts were gone, leaving only memory. He shut the door and walked toward her slowly. His shoulder was mending, the stitches removed. He wore a dark charcoal suit, no tie, the top button undone, more man now than myth and far more dangerous for it. In his hand, he held a silver lighter. He placed it on the table. Beside it, he laid the folded contract from that first night, the property deed, the final debt slip, and the ace of spades. She regarded the collection in silence. He flicked the lighter open, and a flame bloomed in the dim light. Then he pushed it toward her. She understood. She lifted the contract first, touching a corner to the flame and watching it ignite. The paper blackened and curled, the signature lines disappearing, the language of her debt turning to ash. She burned the deed copy next, a symbolic act for a prize hard won, the original now safe. Then the note. Finally, she held the ace for a long moment before feeding it to the fire as well. When the last ember faded in the ashtray, the room itself seemed to exhale. Sergio's gaze never left her face. At last he spoke. "I won the hand, Maya." She looked up. His eyes held hers. "But I never won you." The unspoken words settled in a deep, quiet place inside her. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Then, clearing her throat, she stood and moved around the table until she was right before him. "No," she said, her voice soft. "You didn't." A muscle in his jaw clenched. For a split second, that old fear surfaced beneath his control. The fear that power could secure him cities and loyalty, but never anything given freely. She rested her hand on his shirt, over the heart whose beat she had once counted with her own mouth on a rooftop that felt a lifetime ago. "You earned me," she said. "That's different." He became utterly still. His hand rose to her face, his thumb stroking her cheek as if to be certain she was real, not just another temporary loan from the city. "Maya." It was only her name, but it sounded like the resolution to a question he had carried for far too long. A small smile touched her lips despite the ache in her side. "You know, the city's story is wrong. It usually is. They say Sergio Lombardi won me in a poker game." A faint curve appeared on his lips. "Did he?" She moved closer, erasing the last of the space between them. "No," she said. "He won back every piece of me my father tried to throw away, and then he was smart enough to wait while I chose the rest. That shattered his final reserve. He kissed her, not with force, but like a man who had spent a lifetime containing chaos and had just found the one thing worth the risk of losing control. There was no rush, no uncertainty, no one to watch, just a truth that was warm and devastating, and theirs alone. Her hand slid up his chest to his neck. His arm circled her waist, careful of her bruised ribs even now. The table, the city, the whispers, the blood, none of it faded away. It just lost its power over the center. When they finally broke apart, her breathing was uneven, his forehead resting on hers. "What now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now I keep the house." "Good. I'd keep my name." "Also good. And I take over integrity for your casinos with a contract that lets me fire anyone who thinks I'm part of the decor." That pulled a genuine laugh from him, a low and uncommon sound. "Done. And when we argue, because we will argue, you won't pull rank and I won't throw things unless it's absolutely necessary." He mulled that over with a frustrating seriousness. "Define absolutely necessary." She laughed against his mouth, then she looked up into his eyes and said the truest thing she had left. "The last time I was in this room, I believed my life was over." His expression darkened, not with anger, but with the shadow of that memory. "It never should have happened." "No," she agreed, "but it did, and I'm done letting the worst night of my life write my whole story." She took his hand, leading him from the table and out of the room toward the elevator and the waiting city with all its lights and lies and broken odds. Las Vegas whispers the story it wants to tell. It says her father wagered her in a card game, and Sergio Lombardi, the king who owned half the city, won her. Let the city whisper. Only she and Sergio would ever know the truth. On the night her father attempted to lose her, she didn't become a prize to be won. She became impossible to ever be gambled again.
Life lesson: the deepest betrayal does not destroy a person, it reveals what can never be sold again. Everybody thought Maya was finished the second her father pointed at her like she was one more chip on the table. In that room under those green casino lamps, it looked like her life had just been auctioned off by the one man who should have protected it. And that is exactly why the moment hit so hard. The old man was not just desperate, he was rotten in the most ordinary, terrifying way possible. He was the kind of man who kept gambling long after he had already lost everything that mattered. But here is where the twist punches through like a brick. Maya did not become the victim of that moment. She became the one person in the room who could see the entire scam before anybody else could even blink. That is the lesson people miss when they watch stories about betrayal. The betrayal is not always the ending. Sometimes it is the X-ray. It shows who was weak, who was fake, who was using love as a disguise for hunger, and who had been forced by pain to become dangerously sharp. Maya did not win because life was fair. She won because suffering had trained her eyes. Every lie her father ever told, every debt he buried in her name, every room full of crooks she survived as a child turned into pattern recognition when it mattered most. While other people saw humiliation, she saw the marked deck. While other people froze, she called out the con. That is why this kind of story hits so hard on YouTube. It reminds people that sometimes the very thing that should have broken someone becomes the weapon that saves them. Her father thought he was wagering a daughter. In reality, he was exposing the final proof that she had already outgrown him years ago. He lost her long before that poker hand. He just found out publicly. And that is the coldest lesson of all. When someone treats a human being like property, they do not prove their power, they prove their emptiness. Maya walked out of that room with fear in her chest. Sure, but also with something stronger than fear. She walked out knowing nobody would ever wager her soul again. That is the comeback. That is the hook. That is the life lesson.